Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening for all participants from all around the world. So my name is Dragan Ivanovic. I'm the general chair of the conference. But we will start now actually one pre-conference workshop organized by Social Science and Humanities Open Cloud Project. And the workshop is about vocabulary initiative, what users want. I will just briefly introduce the moderator of this workshop, and then Marike will continue actually with leading the workshop. Marike is a project manager at Trust IT Services, and she's involved in several activities on research projects involving stakeholders engagement, marketing, research, and communications. She's currently leading the dissemination work in the European Research and Innovation projects, Social Science and Humanities Open Cloud, and Policy Cloud, and she's also involved in the Horizons Results Booster and EOSC Future. So Marike, the idea is, let's say that you lead the workshop and you have 90 minutes for your workshop. I hope the audience will enjoy in your workshop and you will collect some useful feedback for your project.
Thank you, Dragan. Thanks for the nice introduction. Let me try to share my screen so that we can start. Okay, is it visible? Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's clear.
Perfect, thanks. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining at the ICTeSSH 2021 pre-conference workshop, SSH Vocabulary Initiative, What Users Want, organized, as Dragan already indicated, the Social Sciences and Humanities Open Cloud Project, in short, SSHOC. So in this context, I would also like to thank the wonderful organizing committee of ICTeSSH conference for having us at the 2021 edition, because we also were at the 2020 edition where we were delighted to engage with the ICTeSSH audience in the agile development of the SSH Open Marketplace user workshop. So thanks for having us again this year. Then I first want to take you through some practical details of the workshop. So you entered in a listen-only mode, but as you have already realized in the past year of online conferences, you can ask your questions in the Q&A. You can see that at the lower bottom of the Zoom interface, but you can also put some comments that you want to share with other people in the audience or with the panelists in the chat function. Of course, after the workshop, we will make the slides and recordings available. And then I would like to also tell you that the goal of this workshop this year is to engage you, the ICTeSSH audience, in raising awareness on the SSH Vocabulary Initiative, to collect also your feedback and your input on managing vocabularies. And in addition, we want to aim to raise awareness on the SSH in the SSH research community, to present here on finding, understanding, and reusing vocabularies. So let me take you to the agenda. Okay, so the SSH Vocabulary Initiative will be introduced to you by Dan Bruder from Clarin. Then we'll have a series of presentations that all contribute to how can researchers use vocabulary in SSH tools and use cases, where we will focus on usage with Juliana van der Lek. She will present using vocabularies in the SSH community. We'll talk about findability with Matej Durko, looking at current ways of locating suitable vocabularies in the SSH Open Marketplace. Interoperability will be addressed by Holly Wright, the vocabulary matching tool. Interoperability, again, will be addressed also by Monica Monaki from Clarin, using machine translation to create multilingual vocabularies. And then we'll have a panel discussion where we also want your input. And how are we going to go about that? We'll, we have a Slido. We asked you some questions through a mail. We prepared you a little bit with that already. We have some questions sent to you, but we want to ask them to you through a Slido in the panel discussion. You provide your input, and then our experts will provide you with their insights and will comment on the input that they received from you, which is very important for us to have for the Vocabulary Initiative. So these are our panelists today. And then it's time for Dan Bruder. Dan, let me briefly present you while you are starting your slides. So Dan Bruder from Claren. In SSHOC, Dan leads the work package on lifting technologies and services into the SSH cloud. Dan, when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I'm just trying to go full screen. Yeah. Yeah, okay, thank you, Marika. So, dear all, welcome at this workshop. This is already the second time that SSHOC organizes a pre-conference workshop at ICTeSSH. Quite a tongue twister, I have to say. Last year, it was about the SSH Open Marketplace, a tool that will also play a role in today's session. For those that do not yet know what the SSHOC project is about, SSHOC is the European thematic cluster project for the social sciences and humanities, where all the current SSH ERICs collaborate, for instance, to see how they can connect to one another's infrastructure. SSHOC is specifically creating the SSH part of the European Open Science Cloud. Now, this workshop is about vocabularies. How can I best introduce these? Well, from my perspective, most of the effort in research concerns describing and analyzing phenomena using descriptive schemas and concepts. And typically for the SSH, there is a high variety of such schemas and concepts caused by that we have a wide variety of data type, subcommunity specifics, different school of thoughts. And next to the content that we need to describe, there are also divergent purposes. And there is also a difference in the available effort to describe things. Some communities, some projects are richer than others. This all leads to this high variety of schemas and concepts. And as you know, vocabularies play an important role in that. They are what I call bundles of concepts. So suitable, well-crafted vocabularies are essential for accurate descriptions, also for countering interpretive vagueness, which it seems that at least the humanities are plagued with. And they're also important for efficient retrieval and search. Controlled vocabularies come in different types. You will have seen that picture, I think, already before. Vocabularies range from humble, simple lists to quite complex ontologies. I would say currently the most important ones that are used for the thesauri, the taxonomies, and the ontologies, we have a quite well established way how to present things, thanks to the W3C standards, RDF, SCOS, and OWL. I don't think there are big problems in having those standards accepted for expressing vocabularies, but there are still enough other challenges. I should say also that although today we concentrate on using vocabularies for describing data and for data retrieval, vocabularies themselves are of course also a topic of research themselves. I mean, vocabularies are lexical resources, and as such, linguists will know what to do with it. But it's quite interesting, but not a topic of today. Vocabularies in the SSHOC project. Well, coordination with respect to vocabularies was originally a limited effort. There were activities going on. So for instance, in one task, there was an investigation for a common recommended platform for publishing and sharing vocabularies. We have activities for testing machine translation for vocabularies. There is a presentation later on that. Vocabularies should be flexible, integrated in different authoring tools, for instance, SSHOC Dataverse. And of course, there are other tasks that are concerned with identifying and creating proper vocabularies for those tools. But there was not clearly one coordinating effort there. And we identified more opportunities during the project for such coordination activity. We noticed that there was in fact a gap. And although many SSH researchers have deep knowledge about vocabularies and managing those vocabularies, that expertise was, I think, not evenly spread. And we thought that having a special task working towards a common approach for different aspects with respect to vocabulary management would be a good idea. So last year, we already started with what we can then call the Clarin Vocabulary Initiative, which was a tight collaboration between SSHOC and Clarin. And Clarin is, of course, one of the stakeholders of SSHOC. But I think the opportunities have not been exhausted yet. And we should strive to get some more things off the floor. And that's also one of the reasons for this workshop. So let me now go over some of the aspects where I think something can be gained. First of all, vocabularies are not always FAIR yet. You will be familiar with the FAIR acronym. Vocabularies should be properly registered, published, etc., just as data is. So we want to have FAIR semantic artifacts. Vocabularies are semantic artifacts. With respect to that registration of vocabularies, there is, of course, the question, will we have to have a specific SSH vocabulary registry, or can we reuse a general one that already exists? For instance, there is currently a vocabulary registry in existence called Bartok, and it looks very nice, very nice. It already has 3,300 entries, whereof 1,200 pertaining to the SSH. So I think we should at least investigate if we could jump on board there. Next to that, need for a vocabulary search facility. So researchers want to, and also managers want to look for vocabularies that are useful for their goals, their projects. There is plenty of opportunity already with searching in vocabulary metadata, but that's not sufficient. You also want to be able to search in the vocabulary terms themselves. Note, I made a special note here that providing optimal recommendations for a researcher is a bit more complicated than just searching for vocabularies in registries. And I hope we will come to talk about that a bit later. Vocabularies and interoperability. As I said already, SCOS and OWL are broadly accepted. But let's be honest, many projects still use spreadsheets or tables, and they're locked in what we call silos using specific software to manage and use these. Now, we cannot help all of these, but we should at least offer them, let's say, some incentive to start using SCOS and OWL, because that's, I think, a major requirement for making vocabularies fair. Then, even if we have SCOS and OWL, there is still the question of having specific recommendations for vocabulary versioning. SCOS and OWL may help you doing that, but they don't give you definite guidelines. Then there is the semantic interoperability. So since all the partners within SSHOC are coming from different traditions, different organizations and different projects, that all have developed different vocabularies in their past for similar data. So some normalization or conversion is needed. There will be a presentation on a very nice tool there, the vocabulary matching tool by Holly later on. And then we should not ignore the cultural and human interoperability aspects. Being able to address users in their own language is, I think, important. So that's why we also have multilingual vocabularies and localization aspects on the agenda. Although SSHOC is a big project, we are limited. We cannot do everything. So we have identified the following topics for working towards common recommendations and I hope also implementations. First of all, the vocabulary versioning. That seems to be a hot topic where many in SSHOC have said that this would be a worthwhile endeavor. Discussing the need for an SSH vocabulary registry, but there is also the, let's say, the good opportunity to board a general registry. Vocabulary recommendations. So there is the question of how can we not only allow discovery through minimal metadata search, but and searching for in terms, but we might also need some other context for having good recommendations, and maybe the SSH Open Marketplace, which is a topic on the agenda, can offer something new there. Then the recommended management platforms. Already during the Clarin vocabulary initiative, we came to a kind of agreement that Cosmos would be a very good vocabulary management platform, but Cosmos is only concerned with sharing and publishing, not about authoring vocabulary. So there is some space yet to come to some recommendations in that respect. I think you already showed the agenda there, Marike, so this is my last slide then. I like to give the floor to the next speaker.
Thanks, Dan. There is a question for you in the Q&A. I would like to propose to take this to the panel discussion. Thanks for the question, Jadranka Stoyanovsky. Dan, maybe you can have a look at it already. It's about to explain a little bit more about the differences between the taxonomies and ontologies. And in the chat, there is an interesting comment by Carol Goble about 10 simple rules to a publication on 10 simple rules for making a vocabulary fair as nice reading material. Thanks.
Yeah. That's good. Okay, I will look at the comments in the chat and see what I can comment direct or take to the panel discussion.
Thanks.
Thank you. Let me stop sharing.
Then Juliana, while you prepare your slides, I will briefly present you. So Juliana van der Lek from Clarin. Juliana is a training and education officer at Clarin, and in SSHOC, Juliana coordinates the vocabulary initiative. Juliana, the floor is yours. Juliana, I think you're muted.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Thanks.
Yes. Okay. Great. Okay. So today I'm going to present you some insights that we have collected last year through the Vocabulary Initiative, and also some research that one of the teams in the SSHOC project did. So the information in this presentation is based on a survey that was sent out in the first half of 2020 to get a better understanding of the actual use of vocabularies and related work practices in the SSH research communities in order to inform the SSH Open Marketplace developments. At the bottom, you can find a link on Zenodo if you want to read more. If you want to read more about this project that was led by Clara Petit-Fils, Suzanne de Michel, and Nicolas Larousse, you have there access to the entire deliverable. So we sent out, the team that I referred to sent out a small vocabulary survey in the SSH community. And they obtained about 72 complete responses. So 72 participants indicated that their organization used vocabularies. 52 respondents out of these 72 complete responses indicating using vocabularies. Here you can see an overview of the SH disciplines of these participants, the types of organizations, countries, and the languages in which they were using vocabularies. As the answers were very diverse and a bit biased because most of the respondents came from France, it was not really possible to identify specific trends and practices within the community. Nevertheless, we did learn that vocabularies are used for example, to describe disciplines, general concepts, geographical entities, persons, scholarly activities, and institutions. But due to the insufficient response rate, it was not possible to conclude that one vocabulary is particularly used within the SSH research community. Nevertheless, some vocabularies stood out, such as DDI, CESTA, Dublin Core, ELSD, and PACTOS, and Getty, of course. And this classification of vocabulary types, of course, is well known in the community, and it will be useful if we set up our own registry. So at the end of the project, we took the list of vocabularies that were indicated via the survey, and we looked them up. We collected them in a spreadsheet, looked them up, and checked what types of vocabularies were, how they were used by the community, in what format they were, whether it was possible to download them, how often they were last updated, how often they were updated, and of course the type of license they were using. This list contains about 91 entries. Unfortunately, I'm not able to share it with you because it's not finished yet. So out of these 91 entries, we spotted a couple of orphan vocabularies, as Dan indicated before, that are available in Word or PDF format that is not easily maintainable and imported in a vocabulary management platform, for example. By working on this inventory, we realized that when selecting vocabularies to be employed in the marketplace, we need to be aware that there are many types of controlled vocabularies of varying scopes, maturity levels, and communities using them. For example, as Dan says, only Bartok contains currently about 3,000 vocabularies. Both the survey and the vocabulary online sessions we organized last year and the workshops revealed that besides a general lack of knowledge and awareness of vocabularies and their benefits, these challenges still need to be addressed. So some vocabularies might not provide full domain coverage or lack concept definitions and examples. And when you find a good vocabulary, you might not be able to reuse it because the data model might not be the same, which raises barriers for harmonization, search, and linking of other vocabularies across different domains. At Clarin, for example, we believe that some of the interoperability challenges could be addressed by reusing existing vocabularies wherever possible, relying on the vocabularies that have already been curated by libraries, for example, and linked to authority files wherever possible. Also, not many vocabularies are available directly in the translation and authoring environments. This has been my presentation in a nutshell. Marike, you have the floor.
Thanks, Juliana. Thank you very much. If you have any questions for Juliana, please put them in the Q&A. If you have any comments, please feel free to add them to the chat. So now, Matej, while you are preparing your slides, I'll briefly present you. So Matej Durko is head of the Austrian Center for Digital Humanities and Cultural Heritage, the technical working group, Tools, Service and Systems. And he was one of the figures in founding the institutes. He has been coordinating the development of applications and the provision of services for numerous projects of the Institute and its cooperation partners. Matej, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm not the head of the ICTeSSH, I'm just the head of the technical group of that. So just if there was some misunderstanding, not yet.
The accent was in the wrong place, okay. Thanks, Matej.
Okay, I'm sharing this one, I hope. And there I already jumped through. Yeah. Okay, can you see it?
Yes. It's okay, thanks.
Thanks. Okay, and vocabularies have been a hobby horse of mine for some time now. So I'm glad to add to this one. Yeah, hello everybody also from my side. So as Dan nicely put it, and kind of our, I would say, kind of Ariadne's path or main principle is sorry, I just came from vacation, so I'm not very focused yet, but it should be better. Anyhow, so FAIR, right, as a guiding principle, and one of the first thing is to find things. So locating or finding suitable vocabularies, also on the focus of the suitable. We heard already, there are many around, but how do I know if I should use it or not? Where to find them and which to take would be, I have some remarks on this. Yeah, so first the proposition, why we should, maybe it's obvious, but still. So we see that vocabularies, our proposition have two main uses. One is to, let's say, within a project or whichever undertaking, formalize and conceptualize a specific dimension of an application domain, and make the semantics explicit to understand each other, but also for the machine, so to say, either through the descriptions or so through relations between concepts. Defining relations between concepts, but and that is already kind of worthwhile, or needed within a project. But if I want to go beyond the project, interoperability, right? Then that would be where I think vocabularies come in very handy or are obvious candidate for building semantic bridges. But for that, you need to reuse them. So not that everybody has their own vocabularies, but trying to reuse the same ones. Kind of obvious, but well, there is the reality is different. Okay, then just jumping right in, where to look for vocabularies at the moment. We already heard that Bartok is kind of the biggest player, at least from the point of view of the size. From what I know, or what we know, they have collected a registry of more than 3,300 vocabularies. And so certainly worthwhile look into it. As Dan said, there are 1,200 in the SSH domain claiming. One smaller kind of caveat or deficiency there is that there is only a partial concept base. So as Dan said, that you want to search on the vocabularies level, but also actually ideally on the concept level, and that's not completely implemented yet, or there is only a partial search on the concept level in Bartok. Then there is another thing which yesterday I looked up was down the page, the linked open vocabularies platform or overview, a catalog. But, and here I have to kind of, yeah, detour a bit, or as a side note, the vocabularies is, I hate the term because it's so ambiguous, or it's been used by many people for different things. And actually, as in Dan's slide at the beginning, one understanding, the broad understanding would be from something very informal up to ontologies, with thesauri and taxonomy somewhere in between. And so the LOV concentrates more on the upper part, like schemas and ontologies, while Bartok concentrates more on the, well, taxonomies and there was this line between, and I would also draw the line here between schemas and ontologies, as opposed to lists of concepts or terms, even if they are structured. And I think there can be quite a clear line drawn. And in this, I would say in this, at least in my talk, I try to concentrate on the lower part, so to say, the taxonomies and thesauri, so list of concepts, and rather disregard the schemas and ontologies, but LOV would be rather for the upper part, and yeah, the ambiguity of the term. Then we have the EU vocabularies. Sounds as a good authority. It's definitely very multilingual. I have to admit, I'm not sure about the quality of the vocabularies themselves. And I'm welcome any opinions on that or experience reports, but certainly worth looking into as well. And we collected some of the vocabularies used in SSH in a survey or in a deliverable, in the research for a deliverable D3.1 in SSHOC about the metadata interoperability problems. So there's also would be one source to look into. Yeah, just a screen of the Bartok page where you have simply, you can look, search through these vocabularies. This is page that was down yesterday, link of vocabularies, and you see here, this is SCOS, DC terms, FOV, and so on. So these are really actually the schemas, even though they call it vocabulary. So I kind of want to highlight here, there is no right term, right? But you have to be clear when you talk to somebody what they mean with this term. So that is, I think, needs to be kind of negotiated every time, and what is the scope of vocabularies in our discussion. Okay, one more thing I would like to bring in, even though it's not about locating vocabularies, but it's about the complexity of dealing with vocabularies and how that affects the lookup and the use of them. So this is partially a generic view, but with some parts of it are specific to how we deal with vocabulary at the academy, at the SSHOC. And the important thing is that, okay, you have to edit vocabularies or create them, or you can get them from some external authoritative source and push them, kind of publish them to a vocabulary repository, which has a browser, that means a user facing interface. But at the same time, we store the vocabularies as semantic, as Dan said, as semantic artifacts in our repository for research data. Plus, vocabularies have their evolution, again, versioning, right, as Dan mentioned. So while you're working on them, you may want to have something like a staging, like a separate instance where you prepare them and see how they evolve, and then only push certain kind of versions to publish them. And the main thing is, I mean, normally you don't use vocabulary as okay, I have a SCOS and I'm happy about it, but you want to have them integrated into your applications where you create your data, authoring metadata and so on, right? So ideally, I want to have the vocabularies at my fingertips when I'm filling in a form as an autocomplete or so. So quite kind of seamless integration. And so that means that here, this is an important part where applications should be able to access those published vocabularies, But at the same time, applications are on the other side, where while I'm working on the data, I probably create new concepts and will mold further or evolve further the vocabulary. So, so this is the complexity of I want to reuse vocabularies, but I also want to change them on the other part, and how to bring this together is quite a challenging thing, because I never seen that somebody came, I showed somebody a vocabulary already existing and said, this sounds like something you might use in your project. Never ever somebody said, yes, this is exactly what I need. It was always, yes, but this is missing, this is too much. So kind of the reuse one-to-one of vocabularies is kind of, well, not so trivial. Okay, okay. Now on the question of suitability, I would say they should cover the right dimension. So is it conceptualizing the same thing, or same area, aspect, or whatever? Are they comprehensive enough? So that is it just some ad hoc list of vocabularies, or somebody took the effort to really cover the whatever dimension it is comprehensively? Then you would want to have it stably available, like persistently, whatever that means, as the vocabulary, but also important stable reference to the concept, so that ideally the URI, the identifier of the concept should be referenceable and should point for as long as possible, forever, to some representation of that concept. Well established means, yeah, so does anybody, or how many people, how many groups are already using it, in how many projects is it reused? Obviously, exactly on the point of semantic interoperability, the value grows with its reuse. Yeah, and so do we know the guys or the people who or are they available? Who maintain this vocabulary? Can I contact them? Can I talk about them, about the possible changes in the vocabularies and so on? So I think you see that I think more I see the focus on suitability more on the kind of meta level of the vocabulary semantic artifact along the FAIR principles, right? And yes, as I said, you probably will never have a perfect match. And so that means you want to have possibility to maybe expand or adapt the vocabulary, or also there can be other ways of, I mean, you can take part of it and establish semantic links between those and so on. So there are many ways, but still you should start from not from scratch, but see what is there that you could actually use, and then maybe adapt. Reusing is probably never reusing one-to-one, but adapting it. Okay, and then the second part, how much time do I have? Sorry. Then the kind of second part of the presentation, well, what can the SSHOC marketplace do for vocabulary findability? SSHOC SSH Open Marketplace is meant as a discovery portal for SSH resources being developed in the SSHOC project. And the basic idea is, so it will be presenting these 5 types of entities or items. So it's tools and services, training materials, data sets, publications, and workflows, which are meant as kind of how-tos on really descriptions of how we would do something. And together with these 3 guiding principles that we have, the contextualization, curation, and community, contextualization, we hope to have more of a knowledge hub rather than just a registry of something, right? So it's not only a list of things, but interconnected to the contextualization. That means relating items to each other. And through these workflows, we want to rather try to answer the question of how can this be used, or how has it been used. So for example, there should be a training material linked to the tool, describing how the tool can be used, or publications describing how a data set has been, or linking data sets used in the publications and so on. And curation and community is mainly to ensure certain quality, or as good quality as possible, and also the uptake and use and reuse. So kind of that's an intertwined two goals, so to say. So you will have community, people will use it if it's of good quality, and by using it, you get good quality, right? So this is the SSHOC market, SSH open marketplace in a nutshell. Already available in the beta version. Should be finished production by the end of the year. And what about the vocabularies there? The vocabularies are planned to be first-class citizens, so to say. They will be, well, they're traditionally difficult to pin them down, but we represent them as tools, but with dedicated metadata properties. And the important thing would be there, as said before, the contextualization, so that we plan to relate them to training materials about vocabularies or publications. And so the added value of the marketplace would be that you don't just have a list of vocabularies, but you, through the context, through the related items, you should get more of a comprehensive picture of how is this being used, and how can I use it, and for example, which tools support it, and so on. And this is an example of TADIRA is a taxonomy of digital research activities in the humanities, quite widely used in the DH area. It is published on a vocabulary repository, actually on ours at ICTeSSH, and developed within mainly DARIA context. And so how would this be represented then at the marketplace? In the marketplace, with some description and dedicated metadata. This does not show yet, so it's work in progress, does not show yet the relatedness, but basically you would see it as you could find it, and you could see it as an individual item within the marketplace. So that would be the idea there. We are still have some way to go. Yeah, and that's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Matej. Thanks a lot. So I see, Matej, there are quite some interesting questions for you in the chat. So while Holly is preparing her slides, maybe you can have a look at the questions and answer them also live in the Q&A. Also, Juliana, I think there's a very interesting question for you as well. And Dan, I would like to invite you also to have a look at some of the questions which are more related to your topic. Then Holly, while I briefly present you, please put up your slides, then we can move on to the next presentation. So Holly Wright is an international project manager at the Archaeology Data Service. Her research focuses on archaeological field drawing and the semantic web, including specialization in visual documentation and communication, archaeological data management, the use of web standards, and the semantic web in archaeology. Holly, welcome. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you see my slide?
Perfectly.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm Holly Wright. I work for the Archaeology Data Service, which is the National Archive for Archaeological Data in the UK, but we're also the deputy coordinators for Ariadne, which is the international aggregation infrastructure for archaeological data. So today I'm just going to talk about basically a use case, so you can kind of see how practically we've been grappling with the different kinds of issues that have been discussed by the previous speakers. And so this is done, the work I'm going to talk about is freely and openly available, obviously developed by Ariadne, but not developed by me, developed by Kerry Binding and Doug Tudhope at the University of South Wales. So I'm presenting their research. So just to give you a sense of what Ariadne is and what we were trying to accomplish and why we needed to do this vocabulary work, Ariadne we're now in the second phase of Ariadne. The first phase ran from 2014 to 2017. Basically we had 27 subject vocabularies that we had to deal with. And when I say subject vocabularies, I mean different vocabularies that were created by the domain experts, so by the archaeologists who were wanting to contribute their data to the aggregation infrastructure. And so these were the domain experts in those countries, in those languages, where we needed to somehow integrate them into an interoperable way. So we spent a huge amount of time wrangling over what subject vocabulary should we use. And this was probably one of the biggest problems that we had to solve in such a large project, which is kind of amazing. But we did a bunch of research, finally honing in on the Getty Art and Architecture thesaurus. It was suitable. So Matai, I have an example for you. We didn't have to change anything. Amazingly, it was, everyone agreed, yes, this does work for archaeology. So we're now in the second phase. It's even bigger this time with 41 partners. Don't even know how many subject vocabularies this time. But we are revising and supplementing the previous mappings and adding new things, and also adding Wikidata mappings. But just to emphasize how important it is to have people who are domain experts doing this work. We have real confidence in when you do a search in Ariadne that you are going to get meaningful results, because we know that the people who did these initial mappings really were the experts in creating these mappings. So why did we need to deal with this vocabulary matching in Ariadne? Partly because we were having the domain experts do the mapping, and they are archaeologists, they're not computer scientists, and we wanted to make things really easy for them. So they literally were just doing sort of the intellectual work of doing these mappings. And as is the case, frankly, with most social sciences and humanities data sets, they were not produced with aggregation and cross-search and reuse in mind. We had a whole range of different languages in use, and we really wanted to preserve those languages and not all map to one language. And basically, what we also realized is that it was really important to have human beings doing the mappings, and not just to be mapping words. We had to come up with a mutually agreed upon meanings of the words. So at first we were thinking, well, obviously it's not easy to map everything to everything. So what we ended up doing was using the Getty AAT as a central spine. So everyone mapped to it. And that allowed us to basically include every single variant, but it also means that it was it became a pass-through device. So if you are searching for something in French, and there is a matching resource out there in Slovenian, then you will find that match, because we were able to keep all of the original languages. But what is so important is, making sure that the people who are doing the mapping are mapping to a concept, not a term, so that we can be confident that we mean the same thing. We're not just saying the same thing. So this is the vocabulary matching tool. It is freely available for anyone to use at that link. It is very simple. You don't have to just load the Getty AAT. You can load other vocabularies to use it. As you can see, it's SCOS based. So you choose what kind of match. Is it an exact match? Is it a broad match? And right now it's basically set up to load your local terms and map it to the Getty AAT, but it also allows you to search and browse the Getty AAT in a very intuitive way, as opposed to just looking at the hierarchy the way the Getty shows it. So it's really important that you be able to, it allows you to do the mapping, but you also see the scope note, you also see the description. So you can say, yes, I agree with the way that this is the way that this does match what I'm thinking that this term means. And just the importance of not doing auto match, at least at this level, if you want to be confident about how the mapping is being done. So I will just end on this slide, and I'll just leave this up for a moment so that you can get any information about the use of this tool, look at the tool, find out the history of the tool, and then the contact details. If you were to contact Carrie Binding, if this is something that you're interested in using in a more robust way, he'd be very happy to talk about it. But because I've only got 5 minutes here, I will just also mention, once we go into the discussion, that this is how Ariadne solved for subject, solved for what. But we also wanted to be able to search on where, and we wanted to be able to search on when. So if any of you are dealing with data that is in the past, that is dealing with a historical record of some kind, we also had to solve for where, with not just modern place names, but also historic place names. So I can talk about that. But really interestingly, we had to also solve for when, solve for time. And in archaeology, the Bronze Age in England and the Bronze Age in Greece, totally different things. So when you're searching for when in archaeology, it has to be tied to where. Very tricky. So I can also talk about that if people are interested in finding out how we solve for that. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Holly. Thanks a lot for this. So Monica, while you're setting up your slides, I'll briefly present you. So Monica Monaki is the head of the LARI Language Resources and Infrastructure Group at the CNR ILC. She's the national coordinator of the Clarin Italian Institute, the Italian node of the Clarin ERIC. In SSHOC, she's the leader of the multilingual technologies task within the work package, lifting technologies and services into the SSH cloud. Monica, the floor is yours. Monica, I don't think we can hear you. Ah, perfect. Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So I will try to show you if and how machine translation can help in SSHOC the task of creating, managing, and using multilingual vocabularies. Wow, I have a problem. Okay. Dan has already explained why do vocabularies matter in SSHOC and why many tasks are concerned with them. So I will not repeat the numerous uses and the numerous critical functions. I will try to concentrate on why in particular multilingual vocabularies are important. And I will do this taking into consideration two typical use cases in SSH. The first one, searching content in users' native language and retrieving data in all languages. And the other typical use case in SSH is the one of compiling appropriately multi-country social surveys where the respondent is asked to specify information, for example, concerning the title or the occupation, is her title or is her occupation. So how we face in SSHOC this challenge, the challenge to deal with these use cases. We try to apply machine techniques for performing the automatic translation from one side of the occupation ontologies, and for the other side, we applied the machine translation techniques to the metadata concept registry of Claring. And in particular, we used the translation services developed by our SSHOC colleagues from the Charles University in Prague. And we applied this tool suite to the set of the approved metadata in Claring. And you have the link here. And we also contrasted these tools with other currently very well known and used translation systems, such as Google Translate, DeepL, and the Reverso service. The language which are into play are English, translated into French, Italian, German, Dutch, Greek, Czech, Slovene, and Russian. And the evaluation of those systems is still running. I put here an example of the procedure of the translation of this manual evaluation, in particular for French here. As you can see, the different systems are checked and they are ranked by applying a set of tags, which are based on which measure the correctness of the translations, both of the metadata and of their definitions. If and where the translation is considered not appropriate, not good enough, we manually provide a correct one. And the benefits, if we consider the use cases, the benefits appear immediately clear. A user who performs a query in his or her native language is able to retrieve data in all languages thanks to the multilingual vocabulary. And as far as the survey compiling task is concerned, the availability of a big multilingual occupation databases where all titles are coded appropriately allow the respondents to self-select a job title from a list of occupations and find the appropriate version, in particular for the languages where the male and female version of the occupational title is an issue. So, to conclude, as a final considerations, at CNR, we are experimenting with machine translation techniques to obtain multilingual vocabularies for SSH. And we are also involved in another task of trying to extract multilingual terminologies from a set of documents which are of interest for the community. And we aim to extend the existing terminologies with these extracted new terms in order to allow a more fine-tuned labeling and classification of texts. And one of the main problems here is to make these vocabularies available in SSHOC as semantic artifacts, as items of the marketplace. And some of them, some of the SSHOC results will be hosted naturally by, for example, for the occupation ontology, the multilingual occupation ontology, it will be hosted by the survey coding database, and the multilingual metadata will be included and managed within the Clarin registry. But reflection on how to host the SSHOC results, the terminology extracted, the SSHOC vocabularies that do not have a home, this reflection is still ongoing, and there is not a default solution. I can say that at CNR we are a Clarin certified center, so we deal in particular with lexical resources, and we are interested and we are looking into this issue of hosting, of providing a home for those terminologies, for those vocabularies. And we are trying to develop a solution for hosting them and publishing them. Also, we are also aware and we are taking into account that vocabularies should be made fair as other research data. So here is the end of my contribution. I thank you for the attention, and I hope to have used my 5 minutes accordingly. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Monica. I see that there's a lot of interesting questions in the chat, so I really want to encourage all the panelists to have a look at them, and if you have the chance, please respond to these questions, because for now we are a little bit behind, but I really want to take this last half hour to really, as we said earlier at the start of the workshop, we really want to understand from you how you manage vocabularies. So in addition to all the speakers that you had seen already, there in the panel, we also welcome Taina Jakle-Lainen. She's a senior specialist at the Finnish Social Science Data Archive, and her expertise areas include data discovery, data harmonization across languages, multilingual controlled vocabularies, and thesauri. And she is the content contact for the SSHDA data catalog and the SSHDA vocabulary service. So as we already announced at the beginning, we want to take you through, to invite you to take part in a short questionnaire. We have a few questions that are meant as a warming up. We'll go quickly through them because then we want to have your input on some of on the questions that we prepared for our further work in the vocabulary initiative. Now, if you can please join us at slido.com. And then you type in the hashtag 682033, or you simply use the QR code here. Then we see you at the first question. So the first question is, what is your role in your organization? So if you join us at slido.com, you then type in the number 682033. And then you please answer the question on what is your role in your organization. We're very curious to know who you are. Researcher, data librarian. More researchers. Researcher PhD, research manager, service manager, administrator. Researchers are the highest, are the best represented group here. Information architect, analyst, panelists, Dan, Mate, Monica, Holly, Taina. If you have any comments here, you're welcome. Otherwise, I think we should move to the next question. We see that researchers are librarians, service managers are the most represented here. PhD. Okay. Infrastructure devos. Can you put in the chat what that is?
I guess it's DevOps.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Perfect. Thanks. Okay. So the next question, are you familiar with vocabularies? Yet again, this is a warming up question, so you can answer not familiar at all, beginner, familiar, very familiar, expert, or I manage vocabularies. So most of you are familiar. It's a 35%. Can't see the not familiar at all. Irena, do you see that? My screen is somehow blocked.
It's 4%, some say perhaps 1.
Okay.
What
then,
is the top one?
Sorry, Matej.
Top one.
How and where did you find the vocabulary or vocabularies you decided to use? Were they provided as part of the tool or the workflow? Were there recommendations from peers? Were they a dedicated vocabulary registry? Were there recommendations from research infrastructures or other? So most of you have answered recommendations from research infrastructures, as well as recommendations from peers. Okay. Dan.
What was the first one, 39?
The recommendations from research infrastructures.
Yeah. You mentioned my name, Marika.
Sorry, Taina. Sorry. Taina, is this something that you see also in SSHOC?
Yes, I mean, SSHOC is a research infrastructure that has a metadata model that says that for certain fields, certain vocabularies are recommended. We're trying to harmonize the data we get from different countries and across organizations. So I think this is probably what is quite common case that there's some infrastructure that is asking you. Yeah. Thanks, Dana.
Matej, do you want to contribute to this question and with your insights from Daria as well and from the SSH Open Marketplace?
But again, I just said that the first answer is lacking the question or the option. I mean,
yeah,
we can't see.
Let me get back. So there are 2 points that has the same answer. So it's recommendations from research infrastructures and dedicated vocabulary registry.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Can I add something to this?
Yes, please.
Great. Yeah, I was afraid that too many of us would be constricted by the tools they are using. Often vocabularies are in fact hardwired in the authoring tools we use. But it seems that there is still a fair amount of choice. They can take up recommendations from research infrastructures. And they can take their choices from dedicated vocabulary registries. So it's not as bad as I feared there. That's good news.
Great.
I would also like to comment that, I mean, this recommendation from research infrastructures on the example of Tadira, for example. So ECS kind of, it's being promoted by Daria, but who is research infrastructures? It's not like some external entity. It's still researchers, the community of the people who agree there. So basically, it's a kind of again, an ambivalent or not clearly definable in which direction the arrow is going. So people are using it, and then research infrastructures take it up and kind of push it for more people using it. Yeah.
But the
this
recommendation
is good, right? This is
that's good.
Right, Yeah.
Kind of this, I want to question this research infrastructures as something that is imposed upon us.
Yeah, yeah, we are the infrastructure.
Exactly.
And involved in creating and maintaining the vocabularies.
Irina, there's also some comments in the chat. I don't have the possibility to see that. I don't know if there's anything that should be added.
We are okay. We can move forward. Yeah.
Thanks. Then the next question is, how do you determine the quality of a vocabulary? The intensive use, the provider, the recommendations by peers, the prescription, standardization, or maybe even tradition or other? And then I also invite Matej and Taina to comment here when you feel ready.
Again, we're missing the
first provider.
first.
Sorry, yes.
Yes, it makes sense.
Yeah, that would be
when you're looking at the vocabulary, that it is a sort of established party that has made it and is maintaining it. So in that sense, that it's a provider, that is the main, that is one of the important aspects of determining the quality. And hopefully also a kind of provider that allows feedback. So if you're using the vocabulary and you don't have a term, it doesn't have a term, or you disagree with the definition, or would like to, it's missing some terms or something, that you get feedback. You have a button you can click and then you can fill in your feedback. I think that's also important.
And Taina, how do you do that? For example, it says that to provide the possibility of feedback.
I hope that when the next version of the SSH vocabulary service interface is up and running, it will have a feedback button on every sort of on bottom right, like it has in the SSH data catalog at this point, that you can always, if you have anything to comment, anything to ask, you can click on the feedback and it will get someone who will answer.
Nice. Matej, Dan, I don't know if you want to add anything here to this.
Yeah, I can. I'm amazed that recommendation by peers is scored so low. While it means that, let's say, the trust has, let's say, for a large part gone over to the provider, which is good, or the standardization organization. That's also good. I think if you go back a few decennia, that, let's say, this recommendation by peers would have scored much higher.
Yes, and there's also one comment in the chat, which is also very valid, which says one aspect of the quality is comprehensiveness. So does the vocabulary have the terms that are needed to describe the issue or the aspect? I mean, it may be a subject vocabulary, but it also may be a methodological vocabulary. Does it cover everything that you need?
And sorry if I interrupt you, I see from the chat another interesting comment by Carol Globe. The comment says that it's not just one of these aspects to determine the quality of the vocabulary, but a mix of all these aspects. And I think that this comment is very, very, very is valid, at least for me. I totally agree with this, which is a mixture of all these aspects.
Thanks, Monica. That's a very interesting comment. And thanks, Carol, as well. Shall we move to the next question? how do you handle vocabulary that fails to cover your descriptive needs? So there's, again, multiple ways you can answer this question. I add additional descriptions in a description field. So this is a little bit what you mentioned as well, Tana. I propose new terms to the vocabulary manager. I choose the closest alternative. I don't use that vocabulary. And here, based on the experience, on the comments you provided already earlier, the presentations you made, Dan, Holly, Tina, please comment here from your perspectives.
Could you roll the screen up a bit, because I don't see what it, yeah, indeed.
So it seems that I propose the new terms to the vocabulary manager is the most.
Well, that's good. It means they are accessible.
Okay.
And I guess I don't use that vocabulary might mean that there might be other vocabularies.
Exactly, choice.
Mm.
Oh,
but I'm surprised about this, the first answer, because I mean, that would be the nicest way, but in my experience, that's not so trivial, because changing the vocabulary, and even if you have somebody who you can ask to add a new term, that can take quite a while before you can use that term again. It gets kind of included into the vocabulary, except if it's kind of an internal one of an application where it's just adding another. So, but if it works for the people, I'm happy for them.
Well, even if it would, let's say, it would not immediately be realized, they get feedback on the lack of fit for purposeness of the vocabulary.
Right? So for me, the question, I mean, but for the usability of kind of when I'm using it, I want to have the new term right away, right? And so I'm wondering what is the latency or the lag between proposing a new term and being able to use it in practice?
One does not exclude the other. So maybe what they do is they propose a new term to the vocabulary manager and they choose then the closest alternative. Our line of questioning does not exclude that possibility.
Yeah.
Seems
the time is running out.
Yes, and then like people say in the chat that sometimes researchers just then use some word that is not in the vocabulary and just give feedback in the hope that it will be there for further use.
Good. Shall we move to the next question? Mapping conversion between entries of different vocabularies. How do you manage that? And this is an open question, so you can answer it in any way you see fit. And then I invite Dan, Monica, Juliana, Holly to comment here from your points of view.
It would be ideal to have a mapping, but it's also because even maintaining a vocabulary is quite, especially if the subject vocabulary is quite resource intensive. But if you have, I mean, in an ideal world, if you have a tool for doing the mapping, and then you have the machine translation to pick up those that are where the concepts really are worded the same, and then that would maybe give you 40 to 50% of the mappings, and then you would need to do the rest manually. Yeah.
For another project, I made some interviews, or we made some interviews with researchers, not only for the SSH, but also the hard sciences, how they manage mappings. And some communities have, let's say, infrastructure to do that, in biomed, for instance. But still, the predominant way of doing this, they have tables, so where you get rows of that list specify the entries from the different vocabularies and a comment, and if there is any conversion needed, it's done usually by hand. And I suspect this is That's also within the SSH, the predominant way of doing it. Well, shared spreadsheet is already a, how do you say, a big step ahead there.
And maybe artificial intelligence will, linguistic.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't bet my life on it, but it would be nice indeed. No, but that's easy. I mean, when, of course, there are NLP algorithms that are able to make some suggestions to a
I mean, even suggestions save a lot of resources.
Yeah, indeed. Because if you have large vocabularies of thousands of words and you have to map one on the other one, I'm sure Holly will appreciate the problem here. It's a huge project in itself, right?
Well, and can I just ask, as we what the other panelists think about this, because as we are working to make our vocabularies fair and make our data fair, and one of the things that I've really been focused on for the last couple of years is, and partly this is because the field I work in is quite subjective, but I'm always asking the question, how do you trust the data enough to reuse it? Is the way that the vocabulary has been mapped good enough and transparent enough that I actually trust the mapping and trust the results that I'm getting from my searches, that I actually would reuse it in my own research? And to me, that's, you know, starting to get into exactly what you're talking about, Dan, where you're going, you know, how much should be manual, how much should be automated? And I think that's a really, really big question when it comes to actually reusing the results. You know, do we know how it was mapped? Do we trust how it was mapped? Not just do we trust the vocabulary?
Well, of course, maybe here's still trust in the, let's say, the person or organization that created the mapping. We really need good provenance information on that. Could help. But of course, I guess you have to make a sample, take a sample from the mappings and check them out yourself.
So very much aware of the time, I would like to move to the next question. I'll just give a few, 1 minute for this one. Do you use vocabularies in your own language? So here we would give you the possibilities. Yes, no, I use English versions, or would like to, if they would be available. So Holly, maybe this is a nice one for you to address.
Yeah, again, the whole idea behind using the Getty AAT as a way, as a central spine to map to, was so that we could try to, basically English is running in the background, but you're still using the vocabulary in your preferred language, and it's returning things in any other language, which I think, because it really was an incredibly contentious thing, and people were saying, no, we don't want to map to, interestingly, we don't want to map to British English, but for whatever reason, people were happy to, the AAT is American, and they were happy to map to that. So again, it's about human beings, it's not just about technology.
Dan, does it help for the vocabulary initiative?
And
yeah, it helps. It amazes me. But I'm more interested what Monica thinks about this.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
Should be a bit of a surprise for her.
Yes, I am really surprised by the majority of people saying, yes, I use vocabularies in my own language. I would have thought totally different scenario where many users use English and not the vice versa. But I think that we need to concentrate on the third answer, question and answer, I would like to, if they would be available. So I suggest to be in contact with us and to explain which are the needs, and if we are able, we can try to understand if it's possible to provide these vocabularies in the language, in the required languages, for example.
Very careful formulation, of course.
Obviously. Careful, but if the language is feasible.
Yeah, understood.
Then I would like to close off with the last question we have, and then I give the floor back to you, Dan. Okay, so what kind of support do you expect from research infrastructures, support services for vocabularies? And this again is an open answer, so you're free to type in your own experience here. So what kind of support do you expect from research infrastructures, support services for vocabularies, technical, advisory support, suitable repos, ease of access? So I invite all the panelists, if they want to contribute to this question, to take the floor.
Yeah, this would be quite in line with, so I would also see the research infrastructures exactly in the role of kind of a stable entity to run also with the technical capabilities or capacities to run the registries, run the repositories, have a stable URL, also kind of a domain. And so the stability and sustainability, I think that would be at the core of what the research infrastructure should provide to the research. And for the vocabularies, it's even more so.
Yeah. What I find interesting, there is one support for as many vocabularies as feasible and crosswalks. It's the first time crosswalk comes around as a term. I support that, of course, because it will greatly facilitate interoperability between vocabularies. But I would say support for as many vocabularies as feasible. I mean, it's not to keep it scalable. We also have to, use some kind of quality stamp on these vocabularies. Matej.
I'm also have my I'm questioning as many as possible or as feasible, because actually, if the less each vocabulary adds to the proliferation and to the complexity. So if there is just one vocabulary we can agree on for some domain, that would be actually better. So as little as possible, I would say, as needed.
Yeah, but there's an interesting suggestion in hosting also a mapping tool. That would be indeed interesting. I mean, there is a great example there with the mapping tool Holly presented. It's limited to, say, the Getty thesaurus. You would like to have it more agnostic with respect to a private vocabulary. But
you can load any SCOS thesaurus into it. It doesn't have to be the AET. It just
comes. It has flexibility already.
It has flexibility, yes.
Good.
Thanks, everyone. Then, Dan, I would like to give you the last 2 minutes of the workshop.
2 minutes only.
Yeah, you only have 2 minutes, but the discussion was very interesting.
Okay.
So I think it
I also thought it was a very interesting session. Great discussions, great questions. I could see there were quite a few experts in the audience, so this is good. We don't want to lose you as an audience, so we have prepared, let's say, this call for contributions. How did you call it, Marika?
Yeah, to connect to us. So to join the community.
Join us. Yeah. Yeah. So to be honest, we do not yet know how to involve a bigger group than that is currently working on it in SSHOC. But it's certainly interesting for us to do so, because there are many that are not represented in SSHOC in any way that we would hear from it. So our proposal is we give you here an email address. If you think this is an interesting topic and you have something to contribute, please send a mail to the address and we will get back to you. We don't know, let's say, with what kind of a proposal yet, but it's a nice chance to be involved, I would say.
Thanks, Dan. And with that, Irena, do you have a nice also survey that we would like to understand how you found this workshop? So when you have a time, please provide your input there. And I want to thank again all the speakers and the panelists that were here today with us, and also ICTeSSH 2021 for having us, and all of the audience for being with us and providing your input. Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
So it's break time now. So you have 50 minutes to refresh yourself, stretch yourself, and come back to the opening ceremony of the conference. Thank you also from my side for the SSHOC team to decide to organize this really interesting